In this video, I'm going to be looking at the appeal of the unappealing and the character design in Fantastic Mr. Fox. So in 2009, Wes Anderson made his first animated film, which was a stop motion called Fantastic Mr. Fox. And in this video essay, I will look into his interpretation of this classic novel. So the story of Fantastic Mr. Fox started in Cardiff, when Roald Dahl in the 1970s wrote Fantastic Mr. Fox. Fantastic Mr. Fox was illustrated by Quentin Blake, and for someone born in Britain, this is what we think of first when we think of Fantastic Mr. Fox and his classic cartoony illustrations. These are drawings that Quentin Blake did for the original Roald Dahl book. The illustrations are cartoony, playful, and they also have an unrealistic dynamic. The fact that they're in 2D lets the characters squash and stretch, which is impossible to translate into 3D, but it gives more flexibility and lets Quentin's work look very animated. After the book was released in 1970, multiple people have illustrated the book over the years. I'm going to look into the popularity of the film Fantastic Mr. Fox. Here is how Fantastic Mr. Fox did at the box office. However, family films continue to make a lot of money in box office after their initial release. Now I'm going to look at the positive and negative of the film, starting with a clip about the negative.
The film is too talky, too full of itself, too smug, too determined to drag everything into Wes Anderson.
And now more about the positive of the film with my next clip.
So, much like Edgar Wright, Anderson's attention to detail is off the charts. Every scene is packed full of beauty and care.
So it shows the film being either seen as very, very good or very, very bad. People have very mixed opinions, and it seems to swing either really good or really bad, not much in the middle. This could be to do with the character design or the animation. I think personally it's probably to do with the character design, as it's quite an unusual character design, and I will get into that now. So to start looking at the character design in Fantastic Mr. Fox, I think it's good to look at what inspired Wes Anderson. And unlike what a lot of people, including myself, in England would have looked at, which is Quentin Blake's interpretation of Fantastic Mr. Fox, which is really cartoony and playful, Wes Anderson grew up with Donald Chaffin's design. You can see in the final film that this really influenced the look of Fantastic Mr. Fox. To show what I mean about Wes Anderson taking more inspiration from Donald Chaffin, here's a picture. Quentin Blake's, which you can see clearly doesn't impact the final design of the film. You can see Donald Chaffin's design, which is very similar to the character design that Phyllis did for Fantastic Mr. Fox. And then the final image, you can see how that turned into the final film. I lent a lot into this book, which is the making of the motion picture book for Fantastic Mr. Fox. And this shows great behind the scenes and really what their inspirations were behind the film. Fantastic Mr. Fox took a very realistic approach, as you can see, by designing the characters in this film. Realistic can come across as creepy, as not many films really go for this aesthetic. In a bit, I'll talk about how the animation really brings the characters to life. If it was just stills of the characters, I think that would come across as very, very creepy, almost taxidermy, which is another inspiration that they had. So characters standing up with human proportions and clothes on comes across as very creepy. It's not what you go out and see when you are walking in nature. And also really interesting to note is the use of costume in the film. The rat instantly reads as a bad character, as we're used to seeing thieves and people in prison wearing stripy red and white. The costumes really show the personalities of the characters and is an instant read. This is one of the early look tests that they did for the film, and you can see that the fox is wearing very traditional English clothing, and it's a weird mismatch of American accents and scenes with very British scenes. This does make the film come across as a bit weird. I'm not sure if that's just to an English person or also American, but it does read quite strange. Here's a clip and it shows the fabrication of the puppets and how they move, what the armature inside is. And this allows the characters to express in every way that Wes was thinking of, and allows them to have such personality, which really stops the characters from being perceived as creepy when they're animated. It also shows the different scales that they used within the film. And I really think they pushed the limitations of stop motion to make characters that could express as much as they could.
This is, you can see inside the head, these paddles allow you to move the eyebrows and cheekbones. This can move separately and you can get different expressions out of it. So this is a full-scale Mr. Fox and Mrs. Fox Badger. Then here's our half scale, and then sometimes we'll use these micro scale. But there's also this scale, which is the, we say, mini micro, for very, very wide shots.
Stop motion comes with a lot of limitations. In CG, you can break physics, and that allows you to express characters in multiple different ways. But with stop motion, there has to be a physical puppet, and this physical puppet has to be rigged and given devices for it to be able to express and capture the hearts of the people watching. The design of the character has to be factored into this to get the best movement and personality from the character and to achieve a good range of movement. Could the design fall into the uncanny valley? I don't think it does, but it's definitely dancing on the edge of the uncanny valley. The video I'm about to shows some development tests that they did for Fantastic Mr. Fox and working out how the character would work in a fabrication sense, but also how that applies to animation. This is a really important step, as it's working out how the character can perform, show emotion, and not come across as creepy. Say if the mouth didn't move in multiple different ways, as we saw in the earlier puppet, then it wouldn't be able to express and it'd be very solid and it would come across as creepy. Almost if you think of earlier animatronics that they were making, those come across as very creepy and really do fall into the uncanny valley. But I don't think, personally, that Fantastic Mr. Fox does.
This is a chain link fence, I guess. What the cuss? Where'd this giant fence come from?
Most of the artwork on screen now is from the Victorian times. In recent decades and years, things have become more cartoony, but the style in the Victorian times was much more realistic. And this is a film that seems to throw back to this more realistic style. It no longer seems like the popular style, and I think it helps give the film a real identity of its own.
For animation, it was inspired by early French films, and you've probably seen them, Czech films and Polish films, and where animation they use stuffed animals sometimes for their animations. So he was inspired by those. So I'm sure he looked at those as well, and he wanted that kind of look to be realistic. You can see the farmer, how humans are probably the closest to humans in stop motion than we had at the time. Now we've seen Anomalisa and other animation films.
So I've been looking at the design now of Fantastic Mr. Fox a lot, saying some good things and some bad things throughout this video, and I thought I'd give you a speculative mood board of how I think I would picture the film if I was giving a director's role or art director role in the film. I think as I grew up in the UK, this mood board is impacted by this, and I think maybe for a UK audience, something more along these lines, which is traditional farming, land and villages throughout the UK, would work better. However, I'm not sure if in the USA it would work better. So to look at other films, they tend to have much more cute animation and character design that really tries to get your attention and to get you to like the character. And I think Fantastic Mr. Fox is really unique because it doesn't try and do this. So, in a design of a CG character, they have very big eyes, they have smooth face lines, and they have really big smiles all the time. They're just very cartoony and really fighting for your attention. And then we have Fantastic Mr. Fox and obviously Wes Anderson afterwards made Isle of Dogs, both which don't come across as cute and don't really ask you to like the characters just based on design, but of how they act and are much more realistic in their personalities and their design. So here's a picture which I think shows how creepy it kind of is. That Fantastic Mr. Fox uses human proportions rather than animals, and obviously they walk on their arms and legs. And these characters seen on the screen don't look too far from the characters in the film. Obviously a little bit, but I think it shows kind of how close it is to being a very creepy film.
At the same time, there is, he wanted it to be sort of closer to real as possible in a way.
Yeah. So I have now looked into how the characters within Fantastic Mr. Fox don't force the audience to like them just based on the character design. And the fact that you end up liking the characters more authentically for who they are, because the design isn't shouting for you to like them. And next I'm going to talk about animation. This is a really big part of the design and how when it's still, it does look very creepy, but when it is brought to life and animated, a lot of that creepiness goes away and also shows their personality a lot, thanks to all of the clever tricks that they put in the design and into the fabrication. So this is a clip that shows how the puppets were actually practically used, and it shows the different scales, so the regular, the micro and the mini micro in use, and it shows how they used the paddles in the face to do the expressions and how it all works to make a really likeable, expressive character, in my opinion. So next up is a interview that I did with Aidan Whittam, and this was about the design and mainly, though, about the animation and how it brings the characters to life. Next, I have an interview with Aidan Whittam, but afterwards he sent me this message, which I thought was really interesting, as it suggests why Wes Anderson might have gone for the style that he did and making it as realistic as he could.
Yeah, I mean, because they look like taxidermy and people are creeped out by that, I think that's where some people did have a problem with it.
Yeah.
But I think because I deal with weird things on a regular basis, it's not really an issue for me.
Okay. Do you think the animation helped out with them being too creepy?
I'd say the animation in that film's weird because you get really subtle, quite realistic moments, and then you switch to like almost like ridiculous rubber hose animation with the characters doing quite wacky things. So it lives in these sort of two sort of extremes, really. So yeah, that is a strange thing. I think it would have been worse if they'd gone for very, very realistic animation. I don't necessarily think it is very realistic. I think maybe the moments you'd find it the most creepy is when you have those really subtle, quite nice bits of performance. But then as soon as they start doing all these wacky sort of silly things, I think they sort of lose it a little bit.
So to conclude this video, Fantastic Mr. Fox, in my opinion, takes a very realistic approach, and it managed to have just as much appeal as a stylised and cutesy CG design, and I think it does it more authentically and doesn't manipulate the audience into liking a character or thinking something about a character. And I think this is partly to do with Wes Anderson's vision for the film. It has a big bit to do with the animators and how they animated the film, the voice artists, and how the design feeds into the puppet making and how that flows into the animation and just the whole thing, how it flows together. And I found out that I don't think a film has to be cute to be appealing for the audience. I think that it can appeal in different ways, and I think it's a much more authentic film, as I was saying before. So thank you for watching this video essay.